Ladies and gentlemen, we have quite a segment of Stopping Socialism TV for you today. The Heartland Institute, spearheaded by Justin Haskins and I, commissioned a new poll with Rasmussen reports, and the results are pretty amazing, I will say. So we're going to dive into that. This is actually going to be the first of a three-part series because there's a lot of results that we want to go through, so we're going to break it up over a couple of videos. But before we dive into any of this, I have to say this every episode. If you want to help us get this message out there, it's up to you. You have to hit the like button. You have to hit subscribe. You have to share this content. It is the only way that our content will get out there, because the people, the overlords at Facebook and Google and YouTube and all that, they would rather us not be seen by anyone. So if you're watching this, you're one of the chosen few. So yeah, help us out. Hit that like button. Share this content. So Justin, how do you want to start? Do you want to kind of go over what the kind of the context of this poll is before we dive into the specific results?
Yeah. So this poll is we as Donnie mentioned previously, the Heartland Institute partnered with Rasmussen, one of the leading polling firms in the nation, to produce a poll. They actually published as a series of polls. There were 3 separate polls that were published, but in reality, it was the same. It was the same group that was polled for all of the questions, and then Rasmussen and Heartland just published it as 3 separate polls. Donnie and I wrote the polling questions. It had some help from Rasmussen, but for the most part, it was Donald and I. We did a pretty good job. We're pretty good at writing polls. This is, I think now we are, well, it's the third time we did this, but I think technically we're up over 10 polls now that have actually been published, 10 published polls, which is pretty cool. So, we really like doing this. We're really interested in polling. We like to know what people think, but one of the things that really the genesis of this idea occurred when we were on a trip to Dallas in this very fine establishment, which we're not going to get into the details of. But Donnie had this great idea to do a survey asking people about their media preferences and then asking them questions about the news, topics in the news. And then you'd be able to compare the two things and see if there is a correlation between not people's opinions of the news or opinions of various policy issues, but actually know what they understand about facts related to the news. So instead of just asking, for example, whether they care about the national debt or whether they're concerned about the national debt, those are opinions. We could actually ask them, what is the national debt? Like, how high is it? And then we'd be able to tell, if we ask those questions alongside questions about media preferences, we'd be able to tell whether there's a correlation between certain kinds of media, certain networks, radio network or television networks, and whether people understand facts related to news stories. Not opinions, but facts. And that's what the purpose of this poll was. So we asked a whole bunch of questions about various topics in the news, factual questions, and then we asked about media preferences, and we're able to compare the two and see if there was a correlation, and there absolutely was.
Yeah. So our hypothesis, basically, after the last couple of years, we've always kind of said, or at least I've said, that like it's seemingly like we're more and more just like the left and the right, like living in 2 different universes. Like, not only are we in different echo chambers, but we're like operating in the world with different inputs that's actually dictating like the way that we interact with the world and each other. So we were trying to think of like, what would be a good way to kind of quantify this? Like, how could we see whether or not we can measure how disconnected from reality people were? So that's what this poll is. So we did a series of questions. We did several on climate change, which we're going to get into in this video. We did a number on police shootings, and then a bunch of miscellaneous stuff regarding like health insurance and national debt, tax rates, stuff like that. But we'll get into some of those topics in our episode 2 and 3 of this little series. But for this one, I want to focus on climate change questions. So do you want to go over any of the kind of the baseline question stuff first, or should we just jump into the specific climate change stuff?
Right. So I think what we should do is probably first we'll go over the questions. There were three questions related to climate change. And so I think we should just say, what the questions are,
Sure.
and then we can go from there.
So question one was, and this is after they talked about what their favorite media preference is, how they consume media, what their favorite channel is, how often they watch it, all of these things, whether or not you're a liberal, conservative. There's a whole bunch of baseline questions like that. The climate change questions we asked is, number one, is climate change caused primarily by human activity or by long-term planetary trends? So this one, I guess, is a little bit more of an opinion one, but it was just kind of interesting to see, like depending on what media you consume, which one of those options that you believe, human activity or long-term trends.
This is, I think, the only question that, there are people who, I think it could be fairly characterized as an opinion question. There are a lot of people who would say, no, it's not. The science is settled. We know for sure. But I think that honest scientists would tell you that there are scientists, very highly qualified scientists, people who have worked at NASA and Ivy League institutions and MIT and elsewhere, who have looked at the information and said that they think that climate change might be impacted by humans, but that it's not the primary reason why we have climate change. And so, for us, this is not really a question of a clear-cut answer. There are reasonable people who think that it's mostly being caused by humans. There are reasonable people who mostly think that it's humans are maybe impacting it, but not the primary reason for climate change. So this one was the only question I think that kind of falls into that opinion category.
Right. Question two, where there is a definitive answer, is how many degrees measured in Fahrenheit has global temperature increased since the late 1800s? A, less than 1 degree, B, 1 degree to 3 degrees, C, 3 degrees to 5 degrees, D, 5 degrees to 10 degrees, E, 10 degrees to 20 degrees, or more than 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So that one we know the answer to, right? And we're just seeing, and when these questions were being asked to these people, it was like, you're probably not going to know these answers offhand, but just take your best guess. Like that's how it was framed. And then the last question is, and this had some of the best results, some of my favorite bullet points is from this last question. If global carbon dioxide emissions continue to increase at the rate comparable to what occurred during the past decade, how many years do you think it will take for humans to become completely or nearly extinct due to climate change? 10 to 20 years, 20 to 50 years, 50 to 100 years, or more than 100 years, or it won't become extinct. So those are the three climate questions. We had ideas of doing more, but these are the ones that we settled on when we were putting the notes together. But
right.
So Justin, which one do you want to talk about first?
So let's start with the degrees, the actual scientific measurements for how many degrees in Fahrenheit global temperature has increased, because I think that one kind of serves as the foundation for the question related to extinction, which I think is the most interesting question. And the first question, we can give the top line results for the first one, but I think that one really isn't super important.
Sure. And before you actually give any of the answers away, I would be very interested for the people that are watching to put into the comments, before we give the answers, of course, what you think the answers are. I would be very curious to see how knowledgeable the audience that are watching this is. So go back, listen to those questions, type them in, leave a comment. Maybe we'll go over it in the next video.
Yeah. So are we not going to give the answers?
No, let's do it right now. If you're putting it in, pause right now and then hit play after you submit comment.
All right. That makes sense. Okay. So the answer to how many degrees global temperature has increased is it was slightly over 2 degrees Fahrenheit. If I remember correctly.
That's over 200 years. That's the timeline too.
No, since the late 1800s, so over 100 years, over 100 and between say 120, 140 years, somewhere in that range. So not quite 200. So in of the options that we gave people in the poll, 1 degree to 3 degrees Fahrenheit would be the range that was correct.
Right.
And of the total people who answered this question, 37%. And this poll, by the way, was of 2,000 likely voters. So we didn't just ask regular people, just anybody, I should say. We asked likely voters specifically. If when they called you on the phone, when Rasmussen called you on the phone and asked if you were a likely voter, you said no, that wouldn't have been included in the results. So likely voters are the only people who we got results for, the only people we were interested in hearing from.
Right.
So 37% got the answer right. About 14% said less than 1 degree. And 27% said 3 degrees to 5 degrees. That was the answer that was second most popular. But what was really interesting were the higher end ones, right? 5 to 10 degrees and 10 degrees to 20 degrees and more than 20 degrees. These answers are all wildly off. Okay. Right. They're all more than double, more than, I mean, how would you say that? Twice as wrong? off by 100%. How would we say this? I don't know. The point is that if you answered 5 degrees to 10 degrees, you are way off by more than double. And if you answer 10 degrees to 20 degrees, then you're even further off. Okay, it's 5 times. So of the people who said 5 degrees up to over 20 degrees, so those 3 different groups, it was 22% of the total said this. So in and of itself, that's pretty interesting. I mean, really, we're talking 1 in 5 people thought that we've had 5 degrees to more than 20 degrees of increased warming, global warming, since the late 1800s, when the answer is actually only 2 degrees. Okay, right. So 1 in 5 people are way off. But what's really interesting is when you start comparing this to questions about media and media consumption, where people are getting their media, what are their favorite cable networks, cable news stations, what are their favorite network news stations, and then comparing how viewers of these different networks answered this question. That's when you really start to see some very interesting results. So for me, first of all, the network that consistently answered these questions, or the viewers that watched, the particular network that got these questions right, or were most likely to get these questions right, were Fox News. Fox News, among all the different networks that we asked about CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, and we also asked for other, which also did about as well as Fox News. It actually did slightly better, but it's not a specific network, so I can't give them too much credit for that. Sure. Another network and Fox News consistently outpaced everybody else. Interestingly, Don't Watch also...
that's my favorite one.
Also scored as well, at 1 percentage point higher, actually, than Fox News, and right in line with another network. So CNN was 30% got it right. MSNBC, 30% got it right. ABC, 28%. CBS, 28%. NBC, 34%. But that only tells part of the story here. It's not just about which group got this question exactly right. It's also which groups had a tendency to dramatically overestimate the warming that has happened. And probably not too surprisingly for those of you who, believe that there is a strong left-leaning media bias amongst these various television stations that we just mentioned, what we found across the board was 60% at least, and I'm looking at it right now, and I think it's maybe 65% at least, of the people who watched CNN, who said CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, or NBC was their favorite network, about 65% or so overestimated warming by quite a bit. And in some cases, it was in CNN, for example, 30% of CNN viewers, so 3 in 10 CNN viewers said that global warming has increased since the late 1800s by at least 5 degrees and by as much as more than 20 degrees. So I these think people are way off.
Right. It's for CNN specifically, 65% overestimated the warming, 30% grossly overestimated the warming. I think that's the way that we should put it. 5 to 10 degrees. I mean, that is way beyond reality. And this is,
Yes,
again, this is not an opinion thing. This is just like a documented fact. And we're going by like the consensus science here. So this is like,
yes.
not taking into account any type of like claims of record tampering or, all the other things that like people say kind of throw off the scale when it comes to trying to measure the global temperature. This is just like, I forget exactly where we got the number, but it was like a NASA number essentially.
Yeah, I believe it was from the it was from NOAA, the National
NOAA.
Oceanic. Yeah, I always forget the acronym, but it's a federal agency that's in charge of keeping track of data related to climate change and this kind of thing. So, so CNN, as you just said, 30% grossly overestimated warming. Interestingly, CNN viewers were not the worst in the bunch. The worst in the bunch were actually ABC viewers. 37% said at least 5 degrees. 13% said 10 degrees or more, which is incredible if you actually believe global warming has increased by that much. But the important takeaway is that when you compare this to Fox News, for example, only 39% of Fox News viewers overestimated warming compared to what was that? What did we say? 65% or so for the other networks. So 39% compared to 65%. That's pretty substantial. For Don't Watch, only 43% overestimated the warming. Again, compared to 65 to 67%. So
these are statistically significant margins that we're talking about here.
Exactly. And so that is a pretty remarkable thing. What it illustrates very clearly is that the people who are watching these left-leaning networks are far more likely to believe that the actual amount of warming that has occurred is substantially higher than the scientific record shows.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt about it. And it's not just, it's very clear that it is a liberal versus conservative leaning thing, because many of the other networks that we asked about are often, many of those are conservative networks. There's not as many liberal independent networks, like say, the Blaze is one of these kinds of other networks. Newsmax would be in that category. OAN would be in that category. Yeah. Exactly. There aren't a lot of liberal networks that are like that because they have so many other options to choose from. ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN. There aren't as many of these other kinds of networks. And Don't Watch obviously is so important in this whole thing as well, because it illustrates you're better off actually not watching the news than you are watching the news, at least on this question, if you want to get the answer right.
You know what we should have added, and this is another thing for people to leave in the comments, because we got a lot of good results, a lot of media coverage over these polls. So we're going to do this in the future. I think that's pretty much set in stone. So if you have any ideas or any other questions that you think should be added into our future polls, just leave a comment. But I was just thinking, what we should have added as like a favorite media consumption channel? Comedy Central and like The Daily Show, because there is a large amount of people our age that's where they get their news. So I would love to have put that in there, but maybe next time.
That's really good. We should actually include that next time. That's a smart idea. So I mean, did you have any? What are your thoughts on this? The thing that stood out to me the most. There's a lot of demographics. We didn't just ask about media. I mean, there's all sorts of other demographics you could look at. You could look at age, party affiliation, political ideology, all sorts of different things. But for me, I focused mostly on these cable news networks and the sort of the mainstream television news networks, because that was the thing that interested me the most. But there was a huge gap amongst all sorts of different demographics.
That's actually a very interesting point, because that's kind of what we were going for. Like that was the thing that we were most looking for when we got these results. But we've got so much other results, so we'll try to link it in the show notes. You can go and click on the link, and then you can find the actual across tabs, the Excel document. If you wanted to really dig into all of this stuff, we'll have it there for you if you want to check it out. But like the big overarching thing that I want to say before we get into this other one about extinction, because I think that's even crazier than the one that we just went over. But like these are widely held beliefs that are dictating policy. So that's why we find this so, important, so important to uncover, because if it was just, this person's thoughts on, oh, we think the Star Wars prequels are good, it's whatever, it doesn't matter. But this is affecting public policy. So if you think that over the last 130 years that global temperatures have gone up, north of 20 degrees, then of course you're going to be thinking that we're headed towards doomsday here. We need to do something about it. If you know the fact, which is over the last 120 years, it's gone up, 2 degrees, maybe you're not so quick on the trigger when it comes to these policies that are going to overhaul and destroy the economy. So that's why we think that this is so important. And I think that kind of message really resonates in this next question. Should we jump into this one?
Yeah, I think this one is such an interesting question. So we asked about the specific question was if global carbon dioxide emissions continue to increase at a rate that is comparable to what occurred during the past decade. So we're saying if global CO2 emissions keep going up roughly at the same rate it's been going up for the past 10 years, how many years do you think it will take for humans to become completely or nearly extinct due to climate change? All right. So this is very clear. It's not some other thing that could cause extinction. It's climate change. And it's tied directly to if we don't do anything to curb carbon dioxide emissions relative to what it's been over the past decade. And so the options were 10 to 20 years, 20 to 50 years, 50 to 100 years, or more than 100 years. The correct answer is, I guess you could answer correctly one of two ways. You could either say won't become extinct.
Yeah.
That would be I think that would be my answer. Or you could say greater than 100 years, because theoretically that's the highest one.
A million.
Yeah, you could say a million. Right. You could say if CO2 emissions keep going up for a million years, that, people will eventually die from this. That's a reasonable answer. What's not reasonable is any of the other answers.
Right.
And the reason why that's not reasonable is because there's literally no scientific evidence. And this is not a right-wing, talking point. There's no one on the left. There's no scientist who is a left-wing scientist. There's no climate alarmist scientist who would actually argue, not a credible one anyway, who would actually argue that humans are going to go extinct or be nearly extinct within 100 years. And all the options that we had, other than more than 100 years and won't become extinct, involved extinction occurring within that 100-year period. And there's just no one who believes this in the scientific community at all. Nobody. Yeah. And so that's the wrong answer. All of those answers are wrong, without a doubt. And what we found was that if you watch CNN, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CBS, liberal left-wing media outlets, you are far more likely to believe that humanity is going to go extinct very soon. Within a century, humanity will go extinct because of climate change. Yeah. And that's just completely devoid of reality. Devoid of reality. So those results were incredibly interesting. We can dive into the specific numbers for that in a second, but that's just incredibly interesting.
Yeah, no, let's jump into it, because I'm looking at the CNN one, and it is, if you include the 10 to 20 years, the 20 to 50, and 50 to 100, we are north of 50% of people that said that CNN is their cable news network of choice. More than 50% of those people think that we're going to go extinct due to climate change within 100 years. 50%. Yeah. Every other CNN viewer thinks that we're all going to die within 100 years.
Yep. It's actually worse for MSNBC. It was 58% for MSNBC.
Almost 6
Nearly
in 10.
6. Yeah. 52% for ABC. CBS was 53%. NBC was 52%. So more than half of the viewers of all of those left-wing networks were believed, more than half of all of them believed that we're going to go extinct within 100 years or be near extinction.
And that's compared to Fox's News. What is that, like 22%, something like that?
Fox News was 26%.
Still higher than it should be, but at least
that's true. Another network is 28%. Don't Watch was 32%. So nowhere near half. in all of these cases. So much less than half in all of these
And then
cases.
for CNN, let's take out the 50 to 100 years. So just between 10 and 50 years, 28%, almost a third of CNN viewers think we're going to go extinct from climate change within 50 years. Within 50 years. It's like, how do you have a conversation with somebody about what we should do in terms of energy policy and climate change policy when they think that we're all going to be dead within 5 decades? Like, how do you, that's what I mean, that separation of like from reality, that disconnect. We're living in different realities here. How do we have like a conversation with these people? That's kind of like the most alarming takeaway that I have when you're looking at these results.
I totally agree. 28% for CNN. MSNBC was 23%. ABC was also 28%. CBS was 26%. NBC was 22%. So more than 20% in all cases, about 1 in 4, if you're just looking across the board, of the viewers of these networks think within 50 years. That means that many of the people who answered these questions believe that in their own lifetime, humanity will go extinct.
Right.
And they may be a part of that apocalypse. Like, they actually think the apocalypse is coming and that they are going to live through it and potentially die from it. Right. Think about that. That is amazing. If they don't think they'll die from it personally, because maybe they're already 50 years old and they think this is 40 years in the future and they don't think they're going to live to be 90, I guess, they believe that their kids or their nephews and nieces or their grandchildren or somebody in their family is going to die from this, almost certainly. I mean, that's insane. That's totally insane. It's not based in reality at all. But it shows you, I think, very clearly that they're not believing this because there's data supporting it. They're not believing it because there's some kind of a scientific analysis or report or something that says it, because there isn't any. There's nothing that says this. So there's got to be some other reason why the people who watch CNN believe this. And I think the most obvious answer is because that's the impression that they get.
Yes.
They may not be getting the numbers that say this.
Right.
I'm not saying CNN says, well, in 50 years, we're all going to die. CNN doesn't say that. What they do, though, is say other things that give you the impression that that's what's going to happen. And so people believe it because that's the narrative. Even though it's a subtle narrative, that's the clear narrative. And that's why people come away with this impression, even though there's no data that anyone's actually using. Even CNN and MSNBC, they're not giving people data saying, well, in 20 years, we're all going to die. No one's saying that. It's just, that's how they present the issue. And so people come away thinking, well, I guess this is an existential threat. I guess that means we're all going to die soon from it. Right. And I don't blame them for thinking that based on the way that it's covered in these networks, but it's wildly delusional. And that's the point. It's devoid of reality. Right.
So I think some of these results came back even better than we expected them to. I think that this one specifically is the case, but it just highlights that disconnect, man, more than anything. This goes well beyond just bias. I'm watching CNN and I think that Biden's a good president or something. There's like causation and correlation questions that you could have when you're talking about that. But this, I think, just clearly shows the more you watch CNN or MSNBC, the more you think these things that are not based in reality. Follow the science, I thought they would say all the time. Well, apparently not so much when it comes to climate change. But
that's right.
But anything else you want to talk about in terms of this specific angle of the poll, or should we call it a day?
I think that the other thing that people need to keep in mind when looking at these questions too is that, and you can see this if you go into the show notes and you go to the links, look at the crosstabs, you'll find all of this information. But there's also a very large gap in terms of the way these questions were answered in age, which is probably not too surprising for a lot of people, especially older people. Older people were far less likely to think that climate change was an existential threat in the sense that, humanity was going to be extinct or near extinction within 100 years. Only 28%, that includes everybody, it includes all the different networks, all the people that we polled. Only 28% of those who are 65 and above said that they thought that it would be within 100 years. And for those who are in the 40 to 64 age range, it was 29%, so almost identical. But for those who are 18 to 39 years old, so this is the people who are in our demographic, Donnie and I, we fall into this demographic, it was 57%. So 57% of the people that we polled between the ages of 18 to 39 believe within 100 years, humanity is going to be extinct or near extinction. And that is probably not just a result of media. That's probably also a result of education and changes that have occurred within the educational system as well. So we're not saying that this is just about media. There's probably other factors involved here too, because a lot of older people watch CNN, but they're less likely to believe we're all about to die than younger people. So there's a bunch of factors involved here, to be sure, but I don't think that you can ignore the impact of the media on all of this. There is a clear, the data is very clear. And when you watch the other videos that we do on these topics, you'll see it's not just about climate change. It's all of the questions, almost every question we asked, with only, I think, 2 exceptions, had this same exact pattern where liberal, left-leaning networks were far, far, far more likely, the viewers of those networks were far more likely to get the questions wrong in favor of the typical liberal, talking point and policy solution to whatever the problem happens to be, than people who watch the traditionally right-wing media outlets.
Yeah, and again, all of the stuff, you can check out the description of this video. You can find the link. You can find the crosstabs with all the raw information here. And if there is anything that sticks out in terms of any of these other demographic questions that you think is interesting, leave a comment in the show notes or in the comments below, and we'll check those out. And maybe we'll do a follow-up video if there's some really interesting takes here. But I think we'll call this segment a day. Thank you for all joining us for Stopping Socialism TV. If you like this content, like I said, you gotta hit that like button. You gotta share this content, or else nobody else is gonna see it. Subscribe to Stopping Socialism TV on YouTube. Find us on social media across the landscape. We're on Facebook, Stopping Socialism. You can find our Parler account. We have a Gab account. I think there's like 2 people on there, but why not? But Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Socialist Twitter and Parler. I before we sign off, I just do think it's important. I think we need to be a little stronger with our ask for people to follow and to like the channel. If you don't like the channel and you watch the channel on occasion, if you don't subscribe to the channel, you're a socialist.
Yeah, you might as well be.
That's it. You might as well just be a Trotsky and loving socialist pig. Is that what you want to be, or do you want to join the Stopping Socialism team of champions? Those are your choices. Do you want to be with the losers over at Jacobin Magazine, or do you want to be with us?
The choice is yours. The
choice is yours, and it starts right now by subscribing to the channel and liking the video and sharing it with your friends and family. Because if you don't do it, big tech is not going to help us out, and there's going to be a lot more Jacobin-loving socialists all over the world, and we can't have that. So please subscribe to the channel.
That's right. The country's counting on you. All right. Thanks. Tune in next time for more poll results.